Chapter 5. Wolf clambered out of his warm bed as soon as the alarm began to sound. He showered and dressed in layers, each layer harder to pull on than the last. A smell of bacon frying seeped under his door, and Jim was piling up 2 plates in the kitchen when he went through. "Eat." Jim shoved the plate at Wolf and tucked into his own. Wolf demolished the lot, and within 10 minutes they were outside loading up the truck. It was dark, gloomy and cold. The dawn barely there, and the grass was crunchy with frost. The truck looked older and more battered in the different light. Jim had the engine running and the windscreen wipers scraping at the ice as he filled another bucket of cold water. "Grab those sacks and put them in the dog boxes, will you?" The sacks were damp, and the dog boxes on the tray only had small ventilation holes. Wolf opened the latches to spread the sacks, and the strong dog smell made him retch. "Get in, boys." Jim turned the tap off and leaned over to let Tag and Ralph out of their kennels. Girl howled in protest, and the little pup went ballistic. "They'll get over it. Come on, let's hurry." Tag and Ralph were sprinting around the yard, making toilet stops, and Wolf dashed back inside to do the same. He was that damn nervous his stomach was churning. "Here's the map," Jim said when he hopped into the truck. "We're going up here, and the road's a bit hairy at this point." His big finger drew a line over the page. "I know the way. The map's for your benefit." Jim threw the truck into gear, and they were off. They'd been driving an hour before they reached the section of the road Jim had called hairy, and it certainly was. Wolf's head swung around the cab as if it wasn't attached properly, and he hung onto the dash to try and keep still. "Can you see where we are on the map?" Jim shouted. "Nah." Wolf couldn't look at the map. His eyes and fingers kept sliding off the page. Jim gunned the truck and climbed up the steep road to the left. It seemed impossible that they wouldn't slide back down the hill. As soon as they turned the corner, the low-rising sun caught them full in their eyes, and Wolf dropped both the visors. The map fell onto the floor, and Wolf clutched the dash as the truck strained. The road finally levelled out, but for the next 30 minutes, Wolf felt as if his teeth were being shaken loose in his gums as the truck swerved, bounced and jutted over the pitted road. Then quite suddenly, Jim pulled off the road and cut the engine. "Here we are," he said. "Whoa." Wolf let go and opened his door. The early morning crept into the truck and soothed his nerves. It was still icy cold, but the sun was doing its best to change that. "Whoa," Wolf said again. "Yeah, terrible bit of road." Jim rechecked the lever down by his door. He sat for a moment with his foot holding the door ajar before he grabbed some pieces of wood from behind his seat and wedged them under the back tyres. Then he let Tag and Ralph out of the dog boxes, but kept them on long ropes. They went crazy with excitement, marking the tyres, surrounding fence posts, and straining to jump the fence into the bush. "Can they go?" "No, we'll keep them on leads until we get through this bush area. There are dock traps and protected kiwi in here." Jim thrust one of the ropes to Wolf. "You take Ralph. He'll pull you up the steep bits." Ralph gave a low growl when Wolf went to give him a pat. Jim laughed. "Grumpy boy, don't be nice to him. He's got a job to do today." They threw their gear over the fence, and Jim lifted the lower wires up for the dogs to crawl under. "Might be a good idea if we put chaps on," Jim said, and he went back to the truck and rummaged in a bag on the back of the tray. Chaps turned out to be canvas leg covers that wrapped and tied over their polyprops and shorts. Wolf felt like a cowboy. He swaggered and threw an imaginary lasso. Jim laughed again. "I used to think wearing chaps was sissy, but I've been hooked up by thorns and bush lawyer enough times to be grateful for them now." Bush lawyer? Yeah, o tataramoa. No one needs a lawyer, and his bloody hook's at the best of times, and this one's no different. This bit of bush is full of the stuff, and it won't let go till it's drawn blood. The bit of bush rose up in front of them, a menacing wall of green which looked impenetrable and hostile. Wolf imagined wild pigs, escaped convicts, and lost spirits watching their movements and planning assaults. At first it seemed silent, as there were no city noises, but once Wolf's ears adjusted, he realised there was a hell of a racket going on. Thousands of birds chirped, called, argued, and sent messages. Wolf paused on the top of the fence and absorbed the din. It seemed, just for a second, that every bird was warning him away. The day was crisp, clear, and still. There was no sign of frost up this high, but it was bitingly cold. Wolf jumped over the fence and pulled his beanie down over his ears. I'm ready. Good-o. Jim zipped his jacket up over his mouth and picked up the rope. He gave it a tug and Tag was yanked away from the post he'd been sniffing. We're going to head up to the ridgeline, Jim shouted through his zip. Quickest way through the bush, and then we'll have a food stop. 40 minutes to our first break. Maybe more. Okay, let's go. Wolf kept his eyes on the ground and tried to match Jim's stride and pace. He was fit for an old bugger and took big steps. The ground was soggy. Wet ferns and bracken slapped Wolf in the face and grabbed at his legs. Water from overhanging branches ran down inside his collar. It took a while to get into a walking rhythm with Ralph, and it was only when Wolf copied Jim by shortening the dog lead and putting Ralph in front that they made real progress. In spite of the cold air and the wet undergrowth, Wolf started to sweat. He pulled his beanie off to cool down, and after another burst of climbing, he unzipped his jacket. Thank goodness he'd worn shorts over his leggings and not another layer of pants. It was impossible to tell how high they were, as the bush seemed to close in from every angle. The ground, though, was definitely going up, and sometimes Wolf had to grab hold of saplings and ferns to stop himself falling backwards. Ralph didn't like the sound of Wolf scrabbling behind him, so he stopped pulling the tow rope, which meant Wolf had to haul Ralph for a while too. Everything smelt damp as the top layer of leaves shifted under their feet. The ground beneath was black, muddy in places, but mostly dense layers of broken down forest litter. Nearly there, Jim yelled after what seemed like 2 hours, and soon the bush began to thin and the pale sun was able to shine through in places. It's too breezy up on the ridge, Jim said. He stared at the treetops moving in different directions. I need to figure out a wind. We don't want the pigs getting a whiff of us before the dogs get a whiff of the pigs. Shall we stop here then? It wasn't really a good place, but Wolf's legs hurt like hell. I think there's a hollow up around the corner. We'll make that the kitchen, huh? It was a perfect sheltered spot for a second breakfast, and they let the dogs off as soon as they arrived. Tag ran in excited circles, sniffing the ground, and within minutes he'd disappeared. Wolf shrugged out of his pack and stretched his neck and back whilst Jim began to untie his pack. Wolf's legs quivered, so he took his jacket off and looked around for a place to rest. A huge crumbling tree lay on the ground behind him, sections of it rotten and moss-covered, but one part looked strong enough to support his weight. Wolf backed his bottom onto the tree as he pretended to listen to Jim explaining the importance of scent. Wolf wanted food and water, and he didn't give a rat's ass about pig scent right then. His bottom had scarcely touched down when he felt a jab in his bum, as if he'd been stabbed with a penknife. The next thing he knew, Ralph had leapt over the stump from behind and pushed him forward into the soft ground. Wolf yelled in protest before he felt another stabbing pain pierce his leg through his leggings and yet another strike his hand. Wolf realised he was being stung and that the yelping and squealing from Ralph meant that Ralph was being attacked as well. What? Help! Wolf crawled forward to escape and Ralph ran around in circles, howling as he went. "You've sat in a wasp nest," Jem shouted. He ran to Wolf, grabbing a stick as he came and began to swipe the wasps off Wolf. "Move, get running, they'll chase you." Ah. Vicious pangs of pain shot out from the sights of Wolf's stings. He clambered up and tried to run. "Go that way, there's a spring. Wash the stings." Jem flicked the stick across Wolf's legs again. "They're angry. I've got to help Ralph." And he ran back to catch his dog. "Hold still, boy. Let me get them." Wolf paused to see Ralph twisting and bucking in pain as Jem swiped at the air and pulled his dog to safety. Wolf wanted to run to the spring, but he couldn't desert Jem and Ralph. He staggered back to hold the writhing dog. "I'd forgotten how painful wasp stings are," Wolf said. As he crouched down beside Jem, there was a quaver in his voice that sounded like tears, so he began to search around Ralph's ears and on his collar to hide his misery. A wasp perched on the silver buckle, its body angled as it tried to reach through the coarse fur at Ralph's neck to find another puncture spot. "Get off there, you creep." Wolf flicked it with a twig and it landed stunned just long enough for Wolf to grind it into the dirt with the heel of his boot. "Here's another one," Jem said, and Ralph gave a distressed whinny. "I need to look in his mouth. Come on, open your mouth." Jem stuck his thumb into the side of Ralph's mouth and it flipped open like a child's toy. "I hope he hasn't swallowed one. It'll be the death of him." Jem peered into the depths of Ralph's mouth and pulled out the folds of his cheeks. "I can't see it too well. Come on, let's get out of here." The wasps were noisy, swarming in agitated groups around the rotten tree and spreading further into the clearing. The nest seethed with a life of its own, so visible and angry, Wolf was amazed he hadn't noticed it there before he'd parked himself. The pain in his buttock, thigh and hand was excruciating. Jem took Ralph's collar off. "Take him down that way to the water." He pointed at a path again through the bush. "I'll get the gear and meet you there. Strip off if you have to and sit in the cold water." Jem smacked Ralph's rump. "Good boy, go with Ralph. Go with Wolf. Get in behind." Wolf pushed and pulled at Ralph until they were headed in the right direction. Every branch or fern that brushed against Wolf made him overreact, and he imagined wasps in his hair or clinging to his clothes waiting to jab him. The pool of water bubbled up in a clearing between 2 or 3 sharply rising rock faces. The water area wasn't much larger than his bath at home, and under different circumstances it would have been a brilliant spot. There were smooth rocks for sitting on, or between, and even a natural plug as the water spilled over the side at one end and disappeared down the hill. "Come here, Ralph." "Here, boy." Ralph splashed into the water and gulped the water. It washed over his nose and ears. Even though the pool was shallow, it flowed swiftly over the edge, so Wolf clung to Ralph and a rock to keep Ralph from being washed down the hill. Within minutes, the cold water on Wolf's hands was too much to bear, but the sting on his palm was numb. Jem came down the track with both day packs dragging behind him. He dropped them by the stream and carefully began to open his. "I've got something for your stings in my kit." "I'm not too bad. I wish these chaps covered me up properly because the wasps wouldn't have been able to reach me through this canvas stuff." Wolf had taken his chaps off and he stuffed them into the top of his bag. "It's Ralph who's really copped it." "Yeah, I'm worried about him. They were all around his nose and mouth." Jem found the cream and threw it to Wolf. "Put that on your stings. Dry your hands first." Wolf used the ointment and then dug out the sandwiches and thermos. Jem had a sting on his hand, which was swelling up before their eyes. He helped himself to Rowena's sandwiches, but left his sore hand dangling in the water. What a start, huh? Ralph saved me when he crashed into me. I could have had thousands of stings. Yeah, that was a serious party you gate crashed. A crust of bread stuck out of the corner of Jem's mouth, and he stuffed it in and reached out to pat Ralph. You're a good dog. I don't know if you'll be up for much snout holding, though, with your own sore snout. Ralph gave a whine and lay with his head on his paws. He ignored the piece of sandwich Wolf held out to him. It was only when there was a yip in the distance from Tag, an excited, get your lazy selves over here sort of yip, that Ralph pricked his ears up, stood to attention, and wagged his tail. Ha, at least someone's doing some work. Come on, Wolf, let's go. That sounded like business.